I want to create a highlight in the center, whipping to the brushing motion. My hand pressure decreases, and towards the end they get lighter and lighter. Every canvas is different, so your approach to every tattoo should be a little bit different. Today's video is going to be very important and hopefully very helpful to you guys, and we're going to go over a good amount of information, but I'm going to try to keep things as condensed and concise as possible. So the topic of today's video is stippling, and there's a few questions that we need to answer before we jump into things. So the first question is, what is stippling? And stippling is just a shading technique that utilizes your liner as opposed to using a mag. So the shading in the tattoo is actually comprised of dots instead of multiple needle marks from a mag. That one is pretty straightforward. The more important question is, why stipple? And there are a few reasons of why you might want to stipple. The first being, in my opinion, stippling is a great first technique to learn because I think it's easier to stipple than it is to use a mag. Now, besides the practicality of it just being easier, the technique itself has several advantages. So first being, you're able to achieve a certain texture with stippling that you can't really get with a mag. So when your tattoo is comprised of dots, it gives it an entirely new look and feel to the tattoo. So imagine if you could stipple certain portions of the tattoo and then use a mag for other portions. The amount of contrast you're going to get in your piece is unbelievable. Apart from that, stippling is very easy on the skin. So if you have a client that doesn't sit very well, stippling is a great way to cater towards the client, and I guarantee you they'll be able to sit longer in your chair if you're stippling on them as opposed to using a mag. And because it's so much less traumatizing on the skin than a mag, you're actually able to layer substantially more using this technique. And that really was a key selling point for me, and a lot of times why I use this technique is because the amount of layering that you can do is almost unlimited. I borderline excessively layer my tattoos when I'm stippling, and I don't deal with any skin traumatization at all, and it's very, very effective in saturating the skin and really building a realistic tattoo, which is mainly the style that I tattoo. I want to keep the beginning of the video as short as possible so that we can jump into the actual tattooing portion. So that's all I have for you guys right now. Let's jump into the actual tattoo. All right, so this is the tattoo that we are going to be looking at today, and we're going to be zooming in on a very small portion of this piece because the truth is, tattooing an eyeball to tattooing a hand to tattooing a leaf, you're using all the same techniques. So once you learn these techniques, you can apply these techniques to whatever you're tattooing. When I first started tattooing, I used to think, okay, well, I've tattooed an eyeball, I know how to tattoo an eye. I've never tattooed a hand, I don't know how to tattoo a hand. The truth is, you use the same technique to tattoo an eyeball that you use to tattoo a hand. So we are going to be working on a very, very small portion of this tattoo, but you can take what we work on this portion and apply it to the entire piece. All right, let's jump into this. Now we are working on fake skin, and I rarely work on fake skin, and as you can see, my stencil was very smudged. I don't know how to get the stencil to stick really well on fake skin, so if any of you guys know how, please drop it in the comments down below. Help me out a little bit. So the first thing I do is I run a very light outline over the stencil just so that I don't have to worry about it wiping away, because as soon as I wipe the first time, it's smeared like crazy. So once my stencil is secure in place, I start shading. And in this portion that we're working on, this arc along the outside of this leaf, all my goal is to have dark tone on the edges and have it blend into a skin tone in the middle. And I want to create a highlight in the center, and then, like I said, have it dark on the outsides. So I start at the bottom And the first thing I do is I do use a whipping motion to kind of lay the foundation and the direction. Since I am trying to shade from dark to light, I am going to use a more directional hand stroke. So as you can see, I'm just flicking the needle up. And the technique behind this is your needle is actually going deeper in the very beginning of your hand movement, and as you reach the end of your hand movement, the needle is barely grazing the skin. So the dots at the beginning of your hand movement are very dark, and towards the end they get lighter and lighter, which helps with the gradation that you're trying to achieve. So now, once I kind of lay the foundation, I don't do the entire tattoo just whipping. I start using more of a brushing pattern to saturate the area. Now, when I transition from the whipping to the brushing motion, my hand pressure decreases. So when I'm whipping, I'm pressing a bit harder because I want the dots at the beginning to be dark and I want them to lighten and I want it to be pronounced. But when I transition over to that brushing movement, all I'm trying to do is saturate the skin so that there's no open skin, and so the dots become less pronounced and it looks like more of a smooth gradation. So I am barely grazing the skin with the needle. And this is going to take a ton of layers, and that's why I said in the beginning of the video, the amount of layering that I do is borderline excessive, but I found that it helps me achieve the level of saturation that I want in my tattoos. And so I would highly recommend it for you guys to try that out as well. So, running it back. In the beginning, when we're whipping, we're pressing a little bit harder because we want the dots to be more pronounced. Now, once you lay that foundation, we switch over to a brushing motion to saturate the skin. You decrease your hand speed and you are patient. Your first layer, your first 2 or 3 layers might not even look like anything is happening at all, and that's okay. Don't rush it. Don't start pressing harder. You're just going to shoot yourself in the foot because it's going to look like you rushed the piece. One thing I've learned about stippling is you have to become very process oriented and not outcome oriented, because this style and this technique that I use takes time and you need patience. And if you're looking for the tattoo to start to materialize quickly, this is not the technique to use. This technique requires layers upon layers upon layers. And the majority of the layers, it looks like you're not even doing anything, but you are. Trust that your needle is hitting the skin. Trust that you're building each layer upon the other and that it's getting darker over time. If this tattoo was completed with 1 layer, it would look drastically different than if it was completed with 10 to 12 layers, right? And like I said at the beginning of the video, this technique is so light on the skin, it's okay to layer. You're not traumatizing the skin. The needle is barely entering the skin. So this allows you to put a ton of layers into the skin and really take your time on a piece. You can see at times I start whipping and then seamlessly I transition into hitting the skin on the way back. So rather than just flicking and hitting the skin on the way forward, after a few strokes, I come back and I start hitting the skin on the way back. And the nice part about working so slow and having such light layers is it allows you to fine tune and adjust your approach depending on your client's skin's reaction. So some people might take the ink better than others, some you might need more layers than others. So when you do this approach, it allows you to really cater towards your client's skin because every canvas is different. And so your approach to every tattoo should be a little bit different, and you should be open to adjusting and adapting based on the reaction your client's skin is giving you. And since this tattoo is done in all black, this really helps you hone in on understanding your hand speed and your hand pressure, because that's the only way you create tones in stippling, is differing your hand speed and your hand pressure. The harder you press on the client's skin, the darker your ink is going to look. The lighter you press, that's where you achieve those really light tones. It looks like you're using gray wash, but but you're not. You're only using black ink. Alright, so as you can see, this is what it looks like when it's done. I've got black coming out from both edges, and I've got a nice shiny looking highlight in the middle. The key to getting a nice shiny looking highlight is your skin tone should blend seamlessly into the ink, and so that's where the whipping is very important. Also the lightly layering. So if you're rushing this, it's going to look harsh, and it's going to look like chunk of skin not tattooed, chunk of skin tattooed. It should all look like one seamless piece of work. So I encourage you guys to try the stencil out. I put it in the description below. And that is all I have for you guys today. So I appreciate you guys watching the video. Catch you in the next one.